Hi again, everyone. Gary Digital Williams here on Boxing on the Beltway, on the Boxing on Beltway Podcast Network. And, of course, Boxing on Beltway Podcast Network can be heard on Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Google Podcast, Google Podcast Addict, and on Spotify as well. You can hear the Boxing on Beltway Podcast Network, you say, wherever you can find a podcast. And today, we actually do have a little bit of news this week. Nothing as far as boxing in the ring. We do have some interesting news about two of our Beltway boxers, two of our Beltway Queens this week. And I go on my seemingly annual rant about DC Sports Hall of Fame. We'll get into that in a moment as well. We also have our tribute this week, our Beltway Boxing tribute, is chronicles a man who I think in all the years that I've been covering boxing in this area, I don't think I've had more fun than covering this guy we're going to talk about this week on the Boxing on Beltway Podcast Network. And we do have a late wrestling tribute that we have. Not a late one, actually a tribute that actually we just heard about it as we record this today. So I want to give you a little tribute to that wrestler as well. Put on a wrestling hat there. So all that coming up here on the Boxing on Beltway Podcast Network, which of course is brought to you as always by real-time pain relief. From boxers to ballerinas, from shoulder pain to muscle strain, everything in between, Boxing Along the Beltway recommends real-time pain relief, the natural, plant-based, safe, fast, effective ointment. You go to freepainoffer.com, buy $10 worth of real-time pain relief. You get a free $10 tube of real-time pain relief, the official pain relief of the 2020 Daytona 500. Rub it on, the pain is gone in real time. And by DeborahSpears.com. She has always great weight loss tips, great training methods, great jewelry as well on Deborah, Debra Spears.com. Well, a couple of news items this week. We have one news item concerning the now current, and I'm not sure you can call this for the second time. I don't think so, because this comes as a result of a second edict, I should say, because it happened earlier in the year. But Baltimore, Maryland's heavy-hitting diva, Franchon Crews-Dezurn, is now once again the WBC and the WBO super middleweight champion. Now, according to BoxingScene.com, Franchon Crews-Dezurn was reinstated as WBC champion after suspending Alejandra Tigre Jimenez for 9 months after failing a drug test in January. Back on January 11th, Jimenez, you may remember, defeated Crews-Dezurn by a 10-round split decision in San Antonio, Texas. About that was on DAZN. She won the WBO, WBC Super Middleweight Championships. Now, the Texas Boxing Commission changed the ruling to a no decision of the bout, and the Voluntary Anti-Doping Agency, the VADA, collected a test sample from Jimenez the day before the fight, testing positive for the banned substance stanozol. Jimenez will be suspended by the Texas Commission for 90 days. WBC would suspend her title reign, and the WBO would put her on the clock. Now, the WBO returned its title to Crews-Dezurn back in March. But WBC, it says Miguel Rivera, BoxingScene.com, WBC conducted a 5-month investigation, also declaring the January 11 bout no contest, and they would too return their title to Crews-Dezurn. Now, Rivera says that suspension of Jimenez is due to the fact that she admitted she tested positive for stanozol, but denies that she ingested a prohibited substance. Well, I think it's kind of splitting hairs in all honesty. But be that as it may, Crews-Dezurn is now, once again, the WBC and WBO super middleweight champions. So congratulations to her as well. Because, again, I didn't get a chance to see that bout, but, again, there are a lot of rumors surrounding her. Jimenez, I should say. All I'm thinking were definitely unfounded and kind of cruel, to be perfectly honest with you. But it's good to see Crews-Dezurn wins that title, regains that title once again. So Crews-Dezurn, Franchon Crews-Dezurn, the heavy-hitting diva out of Baltimore, is WBC WBO middleweight champion. Now, I want to tell you about something that's coming up in the next couple of days. Actually, it'll be on Saturday, June 13th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. You've heard us talk about boxer by the name of Tierra Brown, a dark menace, Tierra Brown out of Washington, D.C., originally from Fort Myers, Florida. But when she came up to D.C., she made a huge impact immediately. First, as an amateur, she fought well, won the world championships, competed in Olympic trials, in going into the 2012 and 2016 Olympics. Didn't make the Olympic team, but she was definitely one of the best in her weight class. One of the reasons why she didn't make the Olympic team because her weight class wasn't included. So she would have to go down to a lesser weight to compete for the Olympics. But be as it may, as a pro, she's been very, very good. But the other, and I think in many ways more interesting part of Tierra Brown's story, for those who have not heard it, is that Tierra Brown is a Washington, D.C. police officer. She's on the bike patrol, as a matter of fact. She rides a bike during her patrol. And this is the subject of a brand new documentary that will be on BET, Black Entertainment Television, called Gloves Off. It premieres on Saturday, June 13th, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, once again, the film will focus on Brown's dual role as a police officer by day and champion boxer by night. And I've talked to her about this. How do you do that? She really is committed to both roles. So committed, in fact, that she was named the D.C. Police Officer of the Year in 2019. And I have seen the Chief of Police in D.C., Peter Newsham, attend a few of Tierra Brown's boxing matches. So that's how I know she's making a serious impact in her community. She is one of those on the front line. She is he's helping out in the community. She's in Ward 6, which is definitely one of our poorest and most needed wards in the city of Washington, D.C., and she does extremely well, and people just love her. And I think this is going to showcase that in this video, in this documentary coming up. Now, she's also has a record of 10-0, 6 KOs. She's the reigning NABO super featherweight champion. She's promoted by DeBella Entertainment, who I know has loved her since the moment she signed that contract. Now, this film is co-directed by Nadine Nator and Ugana Okapaloka. That's close I'm going to get with the name, unfortunately. And it's a film that's funded by the Queen Collective. And this is the development and mentorship program that's launched by actress Queen Latifah, Procter & Gamble, and Tribeca Studios. Nator and Okpaloka were handpicked by Latifah and other black creatives in the film industry as up-and-coming women directors. This is their first documentary, Gloves Off. So I've seen some trailer footage of this. I've seen some of the interviews that the two directors have done. This is like it's going to be an awesome film. And knowing her as I do, I think she's one of the nicest and one of the sweetest persons you ever want to meet. She has a beautiful disposition, great smile. And in the ring, she is fierce. No question about that, as her record has shown, 10-0, 6 KOs. She's just a great person. And I'm looking forward to this documentary. It's called Gloves Off. And it'll be on Saturday, June 13th, 9 p.m. Eastern Time on BET. All right, Tierra Brown, her documentary, Gloves Off. Okay, make sure you catch that. Now, my annual rant about the DC Sports Hall of Fame, and knowing what this rant consists of, is that while I have no problem with who the DC Sports Hall of Fame, and I know some people on the committee, so be that as it may, I have no problem with who they choose. You choose a very good wide range of personalities to be a part of the Hall of Fame. But they always miss one, and I'll tell them who they miss. And if you've listened to my podcast over the years, you know who they miss. But be that as it may. This is actually an outstanding class, I will say that. Now, they have two teams of distinction. That's something they started last year when the Washington Capitals won the Stanley Cup in 2018. In the 2019 Hall of Fame, they named them as their teams of distinction. Well, the other two teams of distinction are the 29 Washington Nationals and Washington Mystics. They've earned the teams of distinction as part of the Hall of Fame. Also in the Hall of Fame, the late Herman Boone. Now, Herman Boone, you may know, was the man that was the head coach of T.C. Williams High School back in 1971. That they went undefeated and won the Virginia State High School Championship. And that was the situation where they merged three high schools together, and it was and Herman Boone was the only black head football coach in Northern Virginia back in that time. And that was a whole situation that led to the film eventually called Remember the Titans, starring Denzel Washington as Herman Boone. And Bill Yost, who was the assistant coach, died in May of 2019, and Herman Boone died in December of 2019. So Herm Boone is going to be in the DC Sports Hall of Fame this year. Also in the DC Sports Hall of Fame, Gary Clark, great wide receiver, primarily with the Washington football team. He played at James Madison University, and he was part of the posse with Art Monk and Ricky Sanders. And, of course, he won 2 of the 3 Super Bowls that the Washington football team won. John Lucas is in the Hall of Fame. Great basketball player at Maryland. Also played at the start in tennis. And one of the first players when they made the rule that you can play college in one sport and pro in another. John Lucas, I remember, was one of the first people to take advantage of that because he played tennis in college and played pro or vice versa. I think he actually played pro basketball. No, he played college basketball and pro tennis. I think it was that way. But anyway, he played both at one point. I think he played part of world team tennis. John Lucas became a coach. He played 13 seasons in the NBA with the Rockets and Rockets primarily. And also he coached in the NBA with the Spurs, the 76ers, and the Cavaliers. Also had drug addiction during his pro career, and he opened up a substance abuse recovery program for athletes. He's done that since 1986. Okay, so John Lucas is in the Hall of Fame. Austin Carr. Now, you have to be a true Washingtonian to remember the name Austin Carr. Austin Carr played at Old Mackin High School here in D.C., and then played at Notre Dame University, where he averaged 38 points a game in his last season there. He went on to play 11 seasons with the NBA, primarily with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Also, Bob Dwyer, who was a major coach at Archbishop Carroll High School. He passed away in 2007 at the age of 91. He led a team that had a 55-game winning streak from 1958 to 1960. On that team were John Thompson Jr., later to be the head coach, of course, the Hall of Fame head coach at Georgetown University. Monk Malloy, who I believe was the chancellor at Notre Dame University, head of Notre Dame University, and George Leftwich, who became a great coach in his own right here in the Washington, D.C. area. Carroll became the first integrated team in the Washington area's Catholic League. That includes the Mathis, St. John's, and all that. They were there. Another coach is in the Hall of Fame, Will Jones. Now, I know Will Jones very well. I knew him very, very well. He was a coach at, he was actually a major point guard here in the Washington, D.C. area. He played at Dunbar Senior High School. He also played at American University before he got into coaching. Of course, he's best known as a coach, as the head coach of the 1982 University of District of Columbia Firebirds that won the Division II National Championship. And boy, they had a team then, and he was a firebrand of a coach. No question about that. Woo! He was some. I remember him taking teams off the court because of different situations, and he did not take any stuff from anybody. So Will Jones is in the Hall of Fame. Also, Will Jones coached at Norfolk State University one time. So I remember him when I was announcing basketball with Howard primarily. He was the head coach at Norfolk State University. He passed back in 2014. And I think my favorite induction this year, and I didn't cover the entire group of people who were in there. I'll get to that in a moment. But my favorite inductee this year from the media aspect of sports was a man who I think, as I've told people many times, Harold Bell started sports talk radio in Washington, D.C. I've always said that, and I never go against saying that. However, Ken Beatrice enhanced it. And his show, Sports Call, that was on WMAL for many years, he was fantastic. He was go-to radio. I remember doing my homework when I was in high school, 7 o'clock p.m., had on my radio, WMAL, and Ken Beatrice was on. He played that theme from Car Wash, and that music from Car Wash, I should say. And he was on there. He goes, "You're next on Sports Call on WMAL." And so he was incredible. And he's in the DC Sports Hall of Fame. He passed away in 2015 at the age of 72. But he was a remarkable voice in the world of sports talk radio. Also in the Hall of Fame is Jill Ellis, who was the coach of the two-time World Cup winning U.S. women's national soccer team. She moved to Northern Virginia after being born in England. She played college soccer at William & Mary. And she's stepping down as coach of the U.S. women's national team after leading the Americans to their second consecutive World Cup title in July. So, again, this is a tremendous class, and I don't have any problems with who they did select. You won't question, my question will not be with anybody they did select. It's always, of course, recently anyway, who they didn't select. And the one person they didn't select is the Hall of Famer, the three-time world champion, first African-American flyweight champion, first African-American super flyweight champion, second American to be the flyweight champion. That's, of course, Mark Too Sharp Johnson. Why they continue to overlook him, I do not know. I have no idea why they keep overlooking him. This is a man who's the youngest inductee. In fact, he may still be the youngest inductee into the Hall of Fame when he went in 2012. He was 40 years old at the time. So I don't know what he had to have done. He meets all the criteria. Look at the criteria that the DC Sports Hall of Fame has, and it's online. Mark Johnson matches every part of the criteria. He was retired. You know, he represented DC. He did everything that criteria says. So why has not been selected is totally beyond me. It has to change. And I've written a letter to him already. I wrote a note to him saying they've got to include him. He meets all the criteria. No reason why he's not in the DC Sports Hall of Fame. So that's my annual rant for this year. Okay, now let's get to our tribute of the boxer. We're going to talk about this week. Of course, we've been doing that with the absence of action in the ring. And this guy, like I said, probably the guy that I've had. I don't think I've had more fun covering a single boxer in this Beltway territory than I did a man by the name of Darnell, the Ding-a-Ling Man Wilson. Now, this man, he was phenomenal. He was just so much fun because he was truly one of the most entertaining boxers in the Beltway boxing scene ever, maybe, but definitely in the boxing on the Beltway era. Darnell Wilson he looked the part, yet he didn't really act the part, so to speak. But he was truly one of the biggest knockout punchers I've ever seen in my life. And I say he looked the part because we looked at him, he looked like Mike Tyson. He really did. He looked like Mike Tyson in facial features a little bit, and definitely in body shape. He was kind of small and compact like Tyson is. And he had one of the fiercest knockout ratios ever in my time in the Beltway boxing. But that's where the similarities ended there. If you sat down and talked to Darnell Wilson, you found out that he was, and he's still around, he is, a truly intelligent man. He was a computer technician. So I got the impression when I would talk to him and I met him for the first time that Darnell Wilson didn't really have to box, in all honesty. He was making good money as a computer technician at that time. But he loved it and he was good at it. So that's why he kept doing it. And he was amazing. Of course, his nickname, the Ding-a-Ling Man, definitely one of the most unique names in the history of boxing. Now, there's one official reason that he was called the Ding-a-Ling Man, and another one you have to figure out for yourself, okay, in all honesty. But there is an unofficial reason. But the official reason is that he rang people's bell, and that's why he was called the Ding-a-Ling Man. There's another reason behind that, but I'm not even going to get into that. Be as it may, one of the most entertaining parts of Beltway boxing was being at an event when Darnell was competing and hearing Chuck Berry's My Ding-a-Ling as Wilson walked down the ring. And when he really got going in the Beltway area and they would play that, the crowd would go berserk. And you hear the crowd going, My Ding-a-Ling. Of course, My Ding-a-Ling, for some strange reason, was the only #1 song by Chuck Berry. I have never figured that out, but that's another talk for another time. But when you heard that my ding-a-ling and the crowd would get into it, it was incredible walking down the ring there. So let's go over the career of Darnell Ding-a-Ling Man Wilson. His final record was 25-21 with 3 draws, and he had 21 knockouts in his career. His career started on November 16, 2000 at Michael's 8th Avenue, Glen Burnie, Maryland. He won a first-round knockout over Rodney Dews. He would come back the next time, May 10th, 2001. He'd fight to a 4-round draw against Willis Lockett, Willis the Prophet Lockett. All right. He would suffer his first loss on June 16, 2001, a 4-round unanimous decision to Damian Rice. And that would be in Queens, New York. He returned to the Beltway and scored a brutal, I remember this back, I think I was there, September 27, 2001, back at Michael's 8th Avenue. He would score a second-round brutal knockout over Lonnie Cornegay. And actually, that was, in Lonnie Cornegay, I should say, Darnell Wilson was the only boxer that Lonnie Cornegay suffered a knockout. Everybody else he fought since then went the distance with Lonnie Cornegay. But Darnell Wilson was the only boxer that have knocked him out. Now, at that point, Wilson's popularity started to soar. He really did. He was incredible. He was knocking just about everybody out in that time. Second round knockout over William Bailey, November 15, 2001, back at Michael's 8th Avenue. He goes to the Wyndham Hotel in Baltimore, Maryland, against Sam Reese on February 28, 2002. Third round knockout. Eric Starr back at Michael's in March of 2002. 6th round knockout. Iman Green, May of 2002. 4th round TKO. Dennis McKinney in Glen Burnie back in June of 2002. 3rd round TKO. Eric Starr back again September 26, 2002. 1st round knockout. He scored an 8th round knockout against Dana Rucker, his first 10-round bout. That was for the Maryland State Cruiserweight Championship against Dana Rucker, dangerous Dana Rucker, at Michael's 8th Avenue, Glen Burnie, Maryland. And Rucker said Wilson would win an 8th round TKO. The knockout streak ended against a guy that I thought would be very tough for him. One half of what was known as double impact, Darren Whitley, along with his twin brother Derek Whitley. Darren Whitley went 6 rounds with Wilson in Wyndham Inner Harbor Hotel in Baltimore, Maryland, back on April 8, 2003. And then he get right back to the knockouts. First round knockout over Charles Lee in May of 2003 at Michael's 8th Avenue. He goes to Atlantic City, scored a 3rd round TKO over Rodney Moore on June 27, 2003. And then on September 26th, he had a rematch against Darren Whitley in 2003, and he would win an 8-round unanimous decision. So Darren Whitley went the distance with him twice in this bout. Okay. Then on December 9th, 2003, 3rd round knockout over Anton Robinson, and this time his Wilson's opponent would be a little bit better. They would start to grow a little bit and get a little better opposition, but still he was knocking people out. 3rd round TKO over Anton Robinson. He comes to D.C. at the Lincoln Theater in March of 2004, scored a 3rd round knockout over Forrest Neal. Forrest Neal was 15-3 at the time. He went 12-round split decision draw with James Lebwana on May 20th, 2004. And that bout was at the Caledon Casino in St. Sault Marie, Michigan, and they went 12 rounds and a split decision there. Right? Then on August 3rd, 2004, Darnell Wilson would fight George Khalid Jones at Michael's 8th Avenue, Glen Burnie, Maryland. And this was an interesting bout for a lot of reasons. If you remember back in 2001, George Khalid Jones fought a guy named B. Taven Scotland here in the area. And the fight took place on the Intrepid ship in New York. And that was a bout where B. Taven Scotland suffered injuries and he passed away. And George Khalid Jones was the opponent at that time. And I remember George Jones came to Beast's funeral along with his trainer at the time, the late great Lou Duva, and everybody rallied around George Khalid Jones, and really was trying to keep his spirits up and really say, we didn't give him we didn't have any blame against him, and we just really want him to continue to fight and maybe win a title for B. Scotland's memory. Well, Khalid Jones did not fight too many times after that fight, but he did come back on August 3rd, 2004, where he fought Darnell Wilson at Michael's Dam in Glen Burnie, Maryland. And who was alongside George Khalid Jones going into that fight? None other than B's widow, Denise Scotland. And George Khalid Jones and Darnell Wilson fought to a 10-round split decision draw. And it was a very bittersweet moment. It was more of a positive moment than it probably could have been. To see Denise, in B. Scotland's corner. I'm saying George Khalid Jones' corner, and supporting him, saying, in essence, that she forgave George Jones for what happened against her husband. It was beautiful. It actually was beautiful to watch. It was that. And in a way, it was kind of nice that the bout ended in a draw, in all honesty. It's a good bout. No question about it. Very good bout. But it was just kind of an interesting situation all the way around. No question about that. Darnell Wilson, meanwhile, would come back and he'd win a 4th-round TKO over John Battle in April of 2005. He'd fight Rockin' Roddy Moore on May 5th, 2005 at Michael's Dam in Glen Burnie, Maryland. I believe that was the second time he fought Moore, I believe. Yes, second time he fought Moore, and he won an 8-round unanimous decision. Then on August 18th, 2005, Wilson would travel to Russia, Kazan, Russia, and fight undefeated Vadim Tokarev. And that fight, Wilson lost by a 10-round unanimous decision. About a month later, I had a conversation with Darnell Wilson during that time, and he said that the biggest reason why he lost that fight was because he was suffering from sleep deprivation. True story. 2 judges of scorecards for the fight had Tokarev pitching a shutout 190, and Tokarev won one judge scorecard by 97-93. Wilson explained that this has been the cause of some of his lackluster efforts throughout his career at that time. He said, quote, sleep deprivation is a combination of a lot of things, including insomnia. Probably been a few of my fights where people have said, quote, what the hell is Darnell doing? He seems out of it. He doesn't know what he's doing or something's wrong. He said, never had any fear of any man ever. But when I went to Russia, the sleep deprivation multiplied 4 times. First 2 nights there, I slept really well, but the night before the weigh-in, night before the fight, I stayed up the entire night. I was in a zone. I was in space. Both days I went to sleep at 8 a.m. for about an hour. And so he told me when I was in the ring, it was like I was almost sleeping. I had no strength, no stamina. Had running 5-6 miles every day, doing hard road work and sprints. So I was in perfect shape, but the sleep deprivation killed it all. I talked to a neurologist, and I couldn't imagine what sleep deprivation would have that kind of effect on you. He said I had no power, and I was slower than butterbean out there. So, again, this was interesting situation there. That was why he claimed, that was one of the reasons why that he lost to Vadim Tokarev. But what it would do, however, would put him in a little bit of a spiral, because he would go on to lose, Wilson would go on to lose his next 3 bouts. He lost a 8-round unanimous decision to Owen Beck. That was in Madison Square Garden in January of 2006. He lost 10-round unanimous decision to Felix Cora Jr. at the Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Hollywood, Florida, back in March of 2006. He lost, and he loses a 6-round unanimous decision in Hollywood, Florida, to Andre Perlette in June of 2006. So he was losing 4 straight, and really we weren't sure anymore where his career would go, where Wilson's career would go at that time. But he was able to turn it around. He did turn around in a big way for a short period of time. In September of 2006, September 28, 2006, Wilson would come back to the Beltway. He kind of moved his base operation to Florida at that time, where he still lives today, by the way. He come back to Michael's 8th Avenue, and I believe this may have been the last time it was the last time he fought at Michael's 8th Avenue against Daniel Judah, Zab Judah's brother. On September 28, 2006, he'd win a 4th round TKO in that bout, and in that bout, Daniel Judah got hit on the shoulder, and you could hear him scream at ringside. I was sitting right at ringside. You could hear him scream, and that was the end of that bout, and Wilson would win that bout. On January 19, 2007, Wilson would travel to Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, score a second-round knockout over Dale Brown. Then on February 23rd, 2007, Wilson scored a big victory over former world champion named Kelvin Concrete Davis. This was at the Catholic Youth Center in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and he would knock Davis out in the 3rd round. It was on national television and on ESPN. It was a big knockout for Darnell Wilson over Kelvin Davis. We thought maybe he had definitely turned the corner and was headed toward a championship run. But to get to that, he would have to maybe win a regional title at that time. And he would face another Beltway boxer by the name of Emmanuel Chukwu Nwodo. And the bout took place on June 29, 2007. Now, originally, the bout was scheduled for the Catholic Youth Center in Scranton, Pennsylvania, but it got moved to the St. George Theater in Staten Island, New York. We wish it was in the Beltway. That's the only thing I have against this bout. But I'm going to tell you something. If this bout had been held in the Beltway, it without question would have earned Bout of the Year and Knockout of the Year. It was one of the most brutal knockouts I have ever seen in my entire life. I've seen a lot of them, but for years I thought nothing would ever surpass watching Vincent Petway knock out Simon Brown. This did that. These two men. And at that time, Emmanuel Nwodo walked in as the USBA Cruiserweight champion. This bout was a classic. It really was a classic. Both men had been knocked down. Wilson scored a knockdown in the 3rd round. Nwodo came back, controlled the middle rounds, but he was knocked down for the 2nd time in the 10th round. And then in the 11th round, Wilson reared back, and he landed a left hand that snapped. You got it. And actually, if you see the video's on YouTube. You can watch the video, but it snapped Nwodo's head back at the same time buckling his knees. And Nwodo stayed down for a long time, and that was the way the bout ended. Now, I'm gonna give you a better description from the man who called the bout for ESPN, Joe Tessitore. Now, this bout was so impressive that when Joe Tessitore had his Friday Night Fights Awards for 2007, Darnell Wilson was named the Fighter of the Year, and this bout was the Knockout of the Year. So, first of all, in fact, let me read the description of the knockout from Joe Tessitore first. Quote, when Darnell Wilson's left glove struck the right side of Emmanuel Nwodo's head on June 29th, it was the hardest hit I have ever seen another person absorb. I don't know how else to describe it. I have not seen another punch delivered with more force or a more devastating result. Teddy Atlas immediately said he couldn't recall a more brutal KO in all his years at ringside. Nwodo's body crumbled to the ground and his legs folded back underneath him. At Teddy's house later that night with family and friends, we must have replayed the moment on TiVo at least 30 times. There have been other very impressive KOs elsewhere this year. There have been KOs that won world titles. But if you were at ringside, You wouldn't question this. KO was among the most vicious, not just of this year, but in the era of fights, end quote. That's the quote from Joe Tessitore of ESPN, who named this bout the knockout of the year and named Darnell Wilson the fighter of the year. And said this about Darnell Wilson that time. Darnell Wilson did more to advance, quote, Darnell Wilson did more to advance than any other. February 23rd, the Ding-a-Ling Man KO'd former world champion Kelvin Davis. Then in June, he made highlight reels across the country with his KO of Emmanuel Nwodo in Staten Island, New York. He's now cemented in the top 10 rankings, and all because of his big year on Friday Night Fights. So that's how huge that knockout was for Darnell Wilson. It was incredible. And he won the USA championship, USBA Cruiserweight Championship as well. But he was my 2007 Boxer of the Year that year, I believe. And it was incredible. That night was incredible. I remember my colleague and good friend Mike Greenhill was there in Staten Island. He had never seen anything like that before in his life. No question about that. Unfortunately, Darnell Wilson's reign was kind of on the short side because he would come up against B.J. Flores, who was an outstanding cruiserweight in his own time, and he would lose the USBA championship to Flores on February 8th, 2008 in Dover, Delaware by 12-round unanimous decision. Darnell would bounce back. He'd win a 6-round TKO over Robert Marsh in Richmond, Virginia, and then he would get his first and only world title bout, and that was against Ferhat Arslan in Baden-Württemberg, Germany. That was on May 3rd, 2008. And he would lose 12-round unanimous decision for the WBA Cruiserweight Championship. Arslan was the champion at that time. Then on January 7th, 2009, Wilson would be a member of the Contender telecast. Contender show. Actually, it was during that time. The show was in Singapore. It was carried on the Versus Network, which I'm not sure what network that is now. But it was known as the Versus Network back then. He was on the cast, and that year they did cruiserweights. So all the big cruiserweights, including the guy he had already lost to, Felix Cora Jr., was on that show, and he would go on and fight. And on January the 7th, 2009, Wilson would lose a 5-round unanimous decision to Ihinomen Ikaminor, and then that would be in Singapore. Now, there was an interesting story about this particular bout as well, because he had a problem making weight. Wilson had a problem making weight. He was 10 pounds overweight, had to go into a sauna to lose that pound, and he had nothing left when the bout took place. So that was a very difficult time for him. And I remember he had a real tough time making weight for that bout. So he lost the bout by 5th round unanimous decision. Of course, the Contender bout's always 5 rounds. He come back in July of 2009, and he would lose for the PABA Pan Pacific Cruiserweight Championship. It was a 10-round knockout, stoppage by Gregory Dezurn. That was in Moscow, Russia. Wilson could not come out for the 11th round. He lost an 8-round unanimous decision to Alex Leopai in Queensland, Australia. He was kind of definitely a journeyman by this point in his career. He would travel over the world, but he'd lose a lot of his bouts. His last win, no, I take it back, that's wrong. He did win a 10th round majority decision over former world champion Juan Carlos Gomez in September 2011. He lost by 4th round knockout to Denis Boytsov in January 2012. His last win would be on December of 2013. He would defeat David Rodriguez in the 6th round, score a KO there in Lansing, New Jersey. He did lose a rematch to Juan Carlos Gomez in April 2012 by 4th round TKO. And then he would lose his last 3 bouts, all by knockout. Last bout being against Adrian Granat in October of 2015 in Hamburg, Germany. And once again, his final record, Darnell Wilson's final record, 25, 21, and 3 with 21 knockouts to his credit. So he was a very enigmatic figure at times. Many times he was an enjoyable figure, no question about that. Enjoyable to watch. Crowds were unbelievable in his time period. And again, I had a lot of fun talking to him. He's a great guy to talk to. We still speak periodically, especially through Facebook. And a nice man, no question about that. Very nice man, and enjoyed working with Darnell, the Ding-a-Ling Man Wilson. Definitely, no question about that. Now, before we go, we learned something today on the wrestling side. I do want to point out, put my wrestling hat on. If you lived in the southern states and watched wrestling in the southern territories, like Georgia Championship Wrestling, Florida Championship Wrestling, up in Louisiana, Mid-South Territory, one of the biggest names in the history of those territories was a masked wrestler by the name of Mr. Wrestling 2. Now, I was very late to cable, by and large. However, my cousin, a cousin of mine who lived down the street from me, she had cable, and she was a big wrestling fan. She was from the Lynchburg, Virginia area, so she watched a lot of the Mid-Atlantic area. And, of course, WTBS was really kind of getting going at that time, and a lot of their viewership hinged on what was then known as Georgia Championship Wrestling. So she'd invite me over to her apartment, and I'd watch Georgia Championship Wrestling. And one of the people I would see would be Mr. Wrestling 2. Now, Mr. Wrestling 2's real name was Johnny Walker. Johnny Walker, at one time, was known as Rubber Man. That was a nickname given to him by a legendary promoter by the name of Paul Bosch. And that was because he was so flexible at that time. And he actually started wrestling in the late 60s, early 70s. And actually retired from it twice. Didn't see a long career in wrestling. But in 1972, a couple promoters down in Georgia would ask him to come out. And they would ask him to be a tag team partner of a guy who was known as Mr. Wrestling, a guy by the name of Tim Woods, outstanding wrestler. And Mr. Wrestling, Tim Woods, is probably maybe better known as being one of the wrestlers who was on the same plane crash that Ric Flair was on October 4th, 1975. Johnny Valentine, Bob Bruggers, David Crockett, the promoter and announcer, Ric Flair, Tim Woods were all in that plane crash. And I believe Tim Woods walked for many years. Now, there was probably no more popular wrestler during the 70s and into the very early 80s in Georgia than Mr. Wrestling 2. Mr. Wrestling 2 was a Georgia wrestling heavyweight champion 10 times. I believe he teamed with Tommy Rich. He teamed with Tony Atlas as the Georgia Tag Team Champions. He won that 5 times. 1975, he was the Wrestler of the Year. 1980, he was the most popular Wrestler of the Year. All come out of the Georgia territory. He had a beautiful finishing move, his knee lift. They call it the $1 Million Knee Lift. And 2 of his biggest fans were very prominent figures at that time, not only in Georgia, but later throughout the whole nation. The governor of Georgia at that time was a man by the name of Jimmy Carter. And not only was he a fan of Mr. Wrestling 2, so was Jimmy Carter's mother, Miss Lillian Carter. And so big of fans they were of Mr. Wrestling 2, when Jimmy Carter got elected president the next year in 76, and they had the inauguration, Mr. Wrestling 2 was actually invited to the inauguration. However, he could not go. And the reason why he could not go, because they wanted him to take off his mask, and he couldn't do it. Yeah, kayfabe was huge at that time. No question about it. But he did not want to take off his mask, and that is why he did not go to Jimmy Carter's inauguration. So he went on through Georgia, and then he moved to, in the latter stages of his career, really, he moved to the Mid-South territory, which starts in Louisiana, goes through Arkansas, Mississippi, and all down in that area of the country. And at that time, he was a little up in age. They say he was close to about 50 years old, I heard, at that time. So he wrestled periodically, but he also served as the coach, mentor, sometime tag team partner of a man by the name of Terry Allen. And Terry Allen was better known later on, and I really think if he did not have his accident, wrestling would have changed. And it was incredible. But Terry Allen was better known as Magnum TA. And again, he was just starting out at that time before he moved on to greater fame in the Mid-Atlantic Crockett territories. But he would mentor Terry Allen, Magnum TA, and they actually won the Mid-South Tag Team title one time. But I think the story went, Mr. Wrestling 2 became a little jealous of Magnum TA, of his popularity, and he was a very handsome guy. He did look a little like Tom Selleck at that time, and that's how he got the name Magnum TA. And during a tag team match with the Midnight Express, Loverboy Dennis and Beautiful Bobby, Mr. Wrestling 2 turned on Magnum TA, and they had a feud, a huge feud at that time. That was and when he turned heel, he would load his knee lift. That would give his knee lift extra strength back in those days. And he actually brought in another wrestler known as Mr. Wrestling 3. And during that time, he'd tell Jim Ross and Boyd Pierce that I'm now Mr. Wrestling and this is Mr. Wrestling 2. And it was just, got kind of a little confusing, but it was a fun feud to watch. And that's where his career, for all intents and purposes, ended at that time. He would later go on to wrestle just a little bit in the World Wrestling Entertainment, but his career would end it would finish in 1986. Now, Mr. Wrestling 2 would pretty much live the rest of his life in Hawaii. Now, there's another part of his legacy that actually come through his wife at that time, Olivia. His wife passed away in 2000, but Olivia was best known for making a lot of the robes that wrestlers like Ric Flair and Greg Valentine and some of the other wrestlers at that time would wear. She'd make them. And that's where we got that bit of history from as well. Now, Mr. Wrestling 2 made very infrequent visits to the mainland, so to speak. When Georgia Championship Wrestling on TBS had its 25th anniversary, Mr. Wrestling 2, who was huge on that, didn't even show up for that. He did film a tribute from Hawaii, but he never really left Hawaii much after his career ended. One of the few times he did, though, was in 2011 for the NWA Wrestling Legends Fan Fest, which I attended down in Atlanta, Georgia. And I did get a chance to meet Mr. Wrestling 2, Johnny Walker, at that time. So it was tremendous. He was a huge, huge fan favorite. No question about that. He passed away as we record this today at the age of 85 years old. So I'll tribute to truly one. And if you talk about Southern wrestling, you cannot talk about Southern wrestling, especially in the 70s and 80s, without mentioning the legendary Mr. Wrestling 2. And that'll do it for another edition of Beltway Boxing Podcast Network. And the Boxing on Beltway Podcast Network brought to you by Real Time Pain Relief. You go to freepainoffer.com, buy $10 worth of Real Time Pain Relief. You get a free $10 tube of Real Time Pain Relief, the official pain relief of the 2020 Daytona 500. Rub it on. The pain is gone in real time. And by DeborahSpears.com. Great weight loss tips, great jewelry, great training methods at Deborah, Debra Spears.com. Once again, don't forget the Tierra Brown documentary, Gloves Off, on Saturday, June 13th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on BET. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Gary Digital Williams. Reminding you as always, keep supporting the best boxing in the world, the boxing along the Beltway. Thanks for listening. Take care.